I've seen a question basically asked, okay, if you didn't know, something, would you still hold that belief? So the specific one that was addressed to me was regarding the Bible. If you didn't know the author, the date, where it comes from, if all you had was just an anonymous manuscript, would you still believe that's reliable or the Word of God?
So here's something that I point out often. There are these would questions like, would you do this? What would you do in this situation? These would questions are really about psychology. These are like, what would you do psychologically speaking? What sort of steps would you take psychologically? How would you be different in your psychology? That question is separate from the epistemological question of what you should do in these situations. But oftentimes, street epistemologists, what they do is they focus on the psychology of belief rather than on the epistemology of belief. And that's an error. I mean, they call themselves street epistemologists. They should be calling themselves street psychologists. So when we ask these questions of like, what would you do? I mean, we can talk about these hypothetical situations all day long, but the real relevant question is, what should we do? And when we phrase it that way, when we ask, well, if you didn't know who the author was, what should you do? I think that puts a different spin on it.
Right.
You're going to want to look at this in a different light. The way that I've heard this question asked is if you were able to take away all of the evidence, or if all of the evidence could be explained to your satisfaction, what would you do at that point? Would you give up belief in God, or would you continue to maintain your belief as confident as you were before? And the way that I suggest responding to this, it's a ridiculously easy question to answer. So, if your confidence in Christianity is tied to the evidence in this way, then the answer is obviously going to be yes. Think about your reasons for believing that Abraham Lincoln was a real person. Now, let's ask the question, well, if we took away all of the evidence that Abraham Lincoln existed, would you still be as confident that Abraham Lincoln existed? And I think any person is going to say, well, no. If you took away all the evidence, if you think about this hypothetical scenario where we don't have any of this evidence, then yeah, obviously I'm going to think about this differently.
Right.
What follows from that?
What if the world wasn't the way it is? Would you still, no?
These questions are really different. I'm often perplexed at why these questions are taken as so groundbreaking.
One thing I wonder, because we keep coming back to this idea of a cumulative case. Is this maybe an attempt again to isolate something, get away from the cumulative case, and just look at one piece? Okay, say you didn't have the other 20 pieces of evidence for why you believe. Would this one still make sense? And I don't know.
So I think they would just frame it in terms of like, well, let's explain away all of the cumulative evidence. I think that'd be a better way to get to this question. So what I think that they're trying to do when they ask this question is they want to determine whether or not there would be a change in confidence on your part of whether or not Christianity was true. And the goal here is if you don't, so if they said, well, if we could explain away all the evidence, would your confidence change? If you answer yes, then they're like, good, okay, we're on the same page. But if you answer no, that your confidence would stay exactly the same, then they're going to really hone in and ask, well, then you believe just because of faith. You believe in Christianity just because that's what you want to believe or whatever. And so that's their way in to deriding your belief in God, is because they want to say that you just believe because of faith, which is, well, this is why I suggest, well, yeah, just answer it honestly. If they ask the question, if they took away all the evidence, what would you do? In most cases, and this is a psychological question. This is an epistemological question.
Right.
If they ask that, then you should just answer, well, think about it for a second and be like, okay, well, would my confidence change? And most people are going to say, well, yeah, my confidence would change, just like my belief that Abraham Lincoln existed. If we took away all the evidence, that'd probably change too. That's one way to respond. Now, we could go a step further, and to me, the answer to that question is going to be no. That we shouldn't lower our confidence in Christianity, but that's going to take probably too much time to explain in this interview. I would say if you want to learn more about why, I would say that visit the website and look up something called Reformed Epistemology. It's a whole branch of Christian philosophy that's really, really fascinating, really interesting, that looks at the way that God sort of created the world, if God exists, if Christianity is true, the way that God would have created humans to believe in him. He would have created in them this sense of the divine, and there's this whole story that can be told of how God engenders or creates or produces belief in God. So there's a whole lot more to say on that, but just off the bat, I mean, even for me personally, like if you said, if we took away all the evidence for Christianity in support of it, I mean, I think psychologically, I would probably lower my confidence in Christianity, even though that I'm a believer in Reformed epistemology. Psychologically speaking, I would probably lower my confidence, even though epistemologically, I would say I shouldn't lower my confidence. So,
well, and I mean, I guess I'd have to ask: does all that evidence? Are you just talking about the external evidence? Because if I still have my personal experience, God exists.
Yeah,
there's no doubt.
Right. That is something that we'd have to look at. And so if they were like, well, if you took away all your personal experience, would you still believe? Then at that point, you'd probably say, well, no. I mean, if I didn't have any experience of God, then I probably would. I mean, but again, nothing follows from this. If you took away all the evidence that Abraham Lincoln existed, it doesn't. Nothing follows.